Okay. Hey, everyone. So I thought that tonight I would give a talk. Maybe it's a little thematic in terms of the season. And that was part of the inspiration, was to talk a bit about reciprocity um, and belonging, because I actually think of those two together, reciprocity and belonging. And I thought I would start with two things. One is one of my favorite quotations from Dogen, a Japanese Buddhist priest, founder of the Soto School of Zen. And this might be a bit of a quotation because he's often quoted and interpreted in different ways, but it's to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. So to study the Buddha way, to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. And I'll come back to that. And then I'll also share the second thing, which is a story. And I've been really looking forward to sharing this story in a Dharma talk. This is the first time I'm sharing it in a Dharma talk because it was so deeply touching for me. And it's something that occurred this summer, late summer, I believe. I have a dear friend and neighbor. Actually, I had two dear friend neighbors, Oma and Lindy, partners for almost 50 years. And Lindy passed away last February. And Oma, it was a big blow. And she was quite depressed, and I was coming over and bringing her food and sitting with her and sharing stories and bringing her novels. But before I left, so then I left for to teach retreat, I think, or was on retreat or something. I was gone for a couple of weeks, and I was checking in on her, and she kept saying, this is it. I feel terrible. I'm going downhill, and this is the end of it. Like, I'm basically ready to leave life, like nothing left to live for. And so then I come back home, and I said earlier, I live in White Salmon, Washington, and there was this other kind of miracle that happened that's probably its own Dharma story, that my sister and I acquired this like tiny little cabin on the White Salmon River, and it had been abandoned for a few years. And it also happened to be kind of my thorough way of a walk back to where I live in a yurt. And so I had just gotten back from being out of town, and I am doing my walk back home across the river, and I go through this little property and this cabin that my sister and I haven't had any bandwidth to deal with, and it's like totally overgrown, and it's a project. But I'm walking through, and someone has like the roof had duff on it that was like half a foot of leaves and weeds all around it, and someone has cleaned off the roof, and has weed whacked all around this little tiny cabin. And just at that time, I pick up my phone and I call Oma, and I just to check in on her, and I said, "So how are you doing?" She goes, "Girl, I have never been better." And like her voice is like totally alive, and I said, "Wow, really? Well, what's going on?" She said, "Well, have you seen the cabin? Have you seen your cabin?" And I said, "Yeah." "Did you do that?" And she said, "Well, so I was feeling so down and out, but you've been so great. You've been so loving, you and your sister both. And I really wanted to do something for you. And so I got the neighbor boy to go up there with a leaf blower. And I was just sort of monitoring. But then as he was working, I just got totally excited. And she's really hardy. She's 80, but she is like hardy. And Reed has met Doesn't matter. And it's like he was getting into it. And so then I started getting the weed whacker out and I started working. And the more I started working, the better I felt. And I just feel like, I think she even used the words, she was like, it felt so good to do something for someone I love. It just gave me my life back. Um, and it was just the most extraordinary conversation. I mean, it was so inspiring and so beautiful. And she really has transformed. I mean, I still see her uh, almost daily. And she's just kind of oriented her whole life around generosity, not just for a little cabin along the river, but, in so many different ways. And she actually was just diagnosed with cancer. And she's kind of excited. She said, well, knowing that I have a real deadline means I can just give everything away while I'm alive. I mean, she is just such a beautiful teacher. So I wanted to share that story as a preamble, although it's such a long story that don't worry, I won't talk that much longer. But I did to kind of talk about this, I think, a really beautiful Dharma theme around a relationship, around reciprocity, around belonging, gratitude, and a Dharma theme or concept that really applies to this whole terrain is familiar to some of you probably, and it's uh, paticca samuppada, which translates into dependent co-arising. And so paticca means kind of because of or dependent upon, and samuppada is arising or originating or coming into being. And it's this teaching that everything is contingent upon everything else. And I have never heard anyone share this teaching in a context of gratitude and generosity, but I am going to do that. And I'll share sort of how and why. Candle also said that a lot of my work is, ecologically or nature-based, and there's at least 3 people out there who know that. Jenna and Sarah were both in my master's program in environmental studies, like almost 2 decades ago. And then Reed is just graduating from our Buddhist eco chaplaincy training. So anyway, it's a very deep bridging in my heart, is this wedding of kind of the ecological and the dharmic worlds. And so if we consider like a tree, for example, and what makes the tree possible, what makes it possible? And you might envision a tree that you live close to or that is close to you, and to just recognize the conditions that make that tree possible. It needed to not only sprout, but it needed wind and rain and good conditions and protection for just long enough when it was a seedling from deer or from whatever might harm it to actually live and keep growing. And beyond that, it needed to be placed. I mean, some seed needed to happen for that tree to become what it is now. And there's a story of 2 monks, and I think one of them was Chogyam Trungpa, and I'm not sure who the other one was, but they were meditating underneath a tree for hours. And at some point, one of them stopped and said to the other one, like, they call this a tree. And then they just both broke out laughing. Because, I mean, can it really be a tree? I mean, it's the rain and it's the clouds and it's the soil and it's all of those conditions that make possible tree. And then we put this name tree on it. We isolate it as one thing, but it actually cannot be one thing. We're all sort of leaning against each other. And what's beautiful about this practice is that actually, as we slow down and we attend to our experience, we attend to even the body being breathed or the body sitting. We really start to see more intimately the way in which we are conditioned beings. We're all deeply conditioned. We're conditioned by one another. We're conditioned by the thoughts. I mean, if something really touches the heart, like that conversation with Oma, there was just this flare up of gratitude in the heart and a lightness to my spirits that was a direct consequence of a 5-minute conversation. Or if there's a thought of worry, like, oh gosh, I have a flight tomorrow. What if I don't sleep tonight and I'm exhausted? Like that has an impact too. It might bring a contraction in the body, an actual physical consequence. So this is a foundational Buddhist teaching, that nothing exists in isolation. And Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese teacher, he used to have this teaching about the piece of paper. He would say, this piece of paper, it contains the cloud, it contains the logger, it contains the sunshine, it contains the logger's ancestors. Like, how can we say this is a piece of paper? He used to use the word interbeing to speak of dependent co-arising. And then ecologically, it's just to consider, like I said, breath, that we're in direct relationship and interdependence with all these photosynthesizing plants, that the water that courses through our veins is sourced from the watershed upon which we live. And we're like 99% water, right? I mean, it's actually quite phenomenal to really contemplate the ecological principles that make up who we are, and yet we consider ourselves again so isolated or separate. And it's actually quite ironic, and I think of this a lot over the sort of holiday time. I think a lot can come up in these days where humans just in general feel more isolated and alone than ever before, and yet we're so technologically connected. So there's an irony there that there's such a kind of epidemic of loneliness, and what is it to really inhabit these circles of belonging that we're really fundamentally part of. So this practice helps us, I think, recover that, and to really grok like that there is no here. I'm not sure if this is going to make sense, but if it does, there's no here without us in it. Like it would not, this moment, this nowness requires us to be part of it. So this understanding that we're part of this whole, that we exist in relationship, I think also it really helps us to see that our participation is kind of this individual expression of the whole. We are all part of this woven tapestry of life, and yet there's a uniqueness of our own individual expression too. And I love this quotation from Martha Graham, who was a beautiful teacher in movement and mindfulness. There is a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there is only one of you in all of time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium, and it will be lost. The world will not have it. It is not your business to determine how good it is, nor how valuable, nor how it compares with other expressions. It is your business to keep it yours clearly and directly, to keep the channel open. You do not even have to believe in yourself or your work. You have to keep yourself open. And there's this story of John Seed, who was the founder of deep ecology, and before that, Buddhist practitioner. But he was kind of taken along to do this rainforest action defense back in Australia, where he's from. And he had this epiphany or this insight where he realized that he had a sense of kind of a non-dual, non-separation, where he realized he was the rainforest defending itself. And I think that's such a kind of beautiful way of making sense of that individual expression of the whole. That here is this person who becomes a defender of the rainforest, but it's the rainforest itself, an embodiment of the whole defending itself. What is possible when we really allow ourselves to be moved by life. So there's a story, I'm sure a number of you have read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, a Potawatomi scholar, writer, biologist. She has this really, I think, evocative story in the book where she asks her students if they love nature. It's a group of college students, and they all say yes. And then she asks them, does nature love you? And I think one person raises their hand. And she describes that like incongruity as a lack of recognizing our reciprocity in the world, our sense of, in a way, it could be a sense of interbeing, that we have a relationship here where we are in conversation, taking, giving, opening, receiving. And let's see if I can find this. She actually writes, knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. So knowing you love the earth changes you, but feeling the earth loves you in return, the relationship is not a one-way street, but a sacred bond. And so I like to think of this sacred bond, this not a one-way street. And we can think of Paticca Samuppada, dependent co-arising. There's no one way here. This is a co-arising. This is an interbeing. And likewise, reciprocity is not a one-way street. It's a giving and receiving. And I like to think of giving and receiving as generosity and gratitude. And these are two actions of the heart that immediately place us into reciprocity, into a sense of belonging, into participation in the world. And you can maybe even contemplate it in your own self, if you've experienced a moment of gratitude, like I did with Oma. There's a softening of the heart, there's a tenderizing of the heart, there's a sort of availability that happens, when we're grateful, when we recognize something has touched us. And then there's, this act of generosity. It's like where we've been touched and we're inspired to give in some way. There's I'll say this, in our eco-chaplaincy training program, we talk so much about listening, or we talk about it and we practice it. This is a fundamental chaplaincy practice, what it is to listen, and in so many ways, listen to one another, listen to the earth. And I like to think of that that practice of listening as this gift, that we are actually giving and we're receiving. We're giving the gift of our attention. We are receiving the words, the languages, the murmurings of another. We're being placed directly into relationship. And what I find so beautiful and kind of provocative maybe about what we do in the eco-chaplaincy training and what's been a big part of my own personal life has been asking how do we listen to our more than human kin, or non-human kin, and how I think impoverished it is to believe that we can only be in communication with other humans. We have this vast world of life that we're part of. What is it to open to those pathways of listening, of connection? There's Robin Wall Kimmerer has written about, like, I don't remember and I wouldn't be able to pronounce it, but apparently there is a word in Potawatomi for the sound of a mushroom popping up through the earth. I think about, what kind of capacity to listen that requires, that level of patience and attunement and slowing down. And there's something so beautiful there, that there's so much life that that we can be open to, that we can be available to, that can touch our hearts, as these gifts. And then the listening being its own gift. There's has anyone seen any of the kids' books written by Bert Baylor? No one online either. There's one of my favorites. It's called The Other Way to Listen. And it's an elder who's teaching their grandchild or something like that, how to listen. And they say, this is part of the text, when you know the other way to listen, so they're teaching their grandchild, when you know the other way to listen, you can hear the wildflower seed bursting open. You hear rocks murmuring and hills singing, and it seems like the most natural thing in the world. Of course, it takes a lot of practice, and you can't be in a hurry. Most people never hear these things at all. Or the sound of a mushroom popping up from the earth. There's also a story from Dan Rather interviewing Mother Teresa, where he asks her what she does when she prays, and says, well, I just listen. And Dan Rather says, well, what is God saying? And she says, well, he just listens too. And if you don't understand that, I have nothing more to tell you. It's a two-way street. It's a sacred bond, right? There's Ajahn Suchito has actually talked quite a bit about gratitude, and or I'd say most monks do, but he has a book on the paramis, and in it he has this story of, there's an island in the Indonesian archipelago where apparently it's seen as a really high degree of prestige to be in debt, because it signifies, like, you have so many social connections that you could never possibly pay all those social connections off. And so there's actually a way in which someone who has all of those connections are seen as, like, just such a success. And I love that too, because it's an indication. It's not about transactional, success or transactional value, but it's the way in which it places us into connection with one another. And that's what's beautiful. Like, the generosity places us into these ways in which we're, of course, connected. If I owe someone a coconut, which is his example, he's like, you paddle to an island, you give a pig, they give you a coconut, but they're indebted to you and they have a bond with you because they're indebted. And then they swap their pig for a pineapple, and then that person is indebted to them, and there's this whole network of feeling connected and belonging. So these ways in which, you know, we give ourselves through listening, through being with one another, through you know, any kind of form of care, and that movement of the heart that places us into a relationship of reciprocity, of belonging, and how important too it is to open ourselves to receive. You know, there's just this life is is our birthright. And so even the practice that I was guiding us in, you know, the two words, let go, letting go opens us up to being available to life right now. So one way too that I like to speak about reciprocity, giving and receiving, in case someone wants another suggestion or ideas, is ritual. I've been thinking and talking quite a bit about this because I teach this Earth Awareness teacher training. And we just had a module that was all about nature-based ritual. And was realizing, you know, when there can be so much sort of, it's the, like, even in our group of teachers, there was a bit of a kind of reluctance or hesitation to feel good about ritual. Like there, you know, like there's a lot of overtones and stigma, I think, around ritual. But as we were talking, as we were having conversation about it, you know, there's such a difference, right, about sort of an empty ritual that we do because we're told to do it that doesn't have a sense of value or meaning to it. But what about an act where we're actually investing it with such a sense of meaning or reverence that we're, again, creating or deepening a sense of relationship in the world? So, for example, I mean, it could be having a cup of coffee in the morning, right? But like what I do every morning is I'll bring a little pinch of lavender or a little cup of water to a tree outside my yurt, and feed the tree and say good morning to the land. And there's a ritual there, and I could do that with as a sort of mechanical act, but I can also do that in a way where I feel a sense of connection, where I feel a sense of aliveness here that I'm honoring. And that is one way that we can really cultivate and deepen that sense of belonging to a larger whole. You know, recognizing that. And so there's this practice of simply cultivating that mindful presence that opens us up to that awareness of interbeing. And then there's little acts we can do that place us in relationship. You know, to be generous with our time and our attention, and to consider rituals that might deepen those pathways of connection. So I'll end with just a couple more things. One is just to repeat the quotation from Dogen, which maybe will make a little bit more sense after what I've shared. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. And forgetting the self and recognizing that we are conditioned by, we are part of myriad things, all life. And then I'll end with a poem, which I think really, it's one of my favorite poems. And well, I'll just share a poem. It's Joy Harjo's Eagle poem. To pray, you open your whole self to sky, to earth, to sun, to moon, to one whole voice that is you. And know there is more that you can't see, can't hear, can't know except in moments steadily growing, and in languages that aren't always sound, but other circles of motion. Like eagle that Sunday morning over Salt River, circled in blue sky, in wind, swept our hearts clean with sacred wings. We see you, see ourselves, and know that we must take the utmost care and kindness in all things. Breathe in knowing we are made of all this, and breathe, knowing we are truly blessed because we were born and die soon within a true circle of motion, like eagle rounding out the morning inside us. We pray that it will be done in beauty, in beauty. Let's just sit for a minute. Just letting the words settle. Thank you for your attention. And I had some more stories, but I wanted to leave some time for conversation, and would love to hear, anything, any reflections online and in the room you might have, or questions or stories of generosity and gratitude that